ancient history, uh, spotlighting the Bible as we go, trying to learn, trying to put the Bible in context of the events that occurred around it in the ancient history. The last couple of weeks, we've been talking about ancient Israel. We talked about, first of all, we talked about the patriarchal area and Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and their exodus into Egypt. Then we talked about the period of time of the Exodus, as well as the 40 years in the wilderness last week. And then, of course, we talked about Joshua and their conquest of what we call Canaan. So today, last week also, we talked about Judges. I forgot about that. We talked about the era of the Judges, where basically you had 400 years where the Hebrews, the Bible said, did their own thing. And finally came down to the point where they asked Samuel, the last prophet, the last judge, to give them a king. And so that enters into what we know as the era of the kingship. And today we're going to talk about the three basic kings of Israel. We're going to talk about Saul, we're going to talk about David, and we're going to talk about Solomon. And we're going to particularly talk about the archaeological evidence that supports their existence. Again, I let Pastor Dwayne do the theology on Thursdays, and he's the Bible scholar, and he is much more adept at that than I am. I'm a historian, and so I concentrated on the historical aspects of these characters. So, what did we learn last week? Well, we learned that there's scant evidence of the 40 years in the wilderness, but we nevertheless can identify some of the places mentioned in the Bible, particularly the first 2 years. The last 38 years, they were definitely roaming around in the desert and the wilderness, and it's hard to track exactly where they were until they got to Mount Nebo at the end of their 40 years. We learned there is a scientific explanation for manna. We discussed the traditional location of Mount Sinai. We learned of the archaeological evidence supporting the fall of Jericho. We reviewed the era of the Judges. And we learned that the traditional Philistine temples universally did resemble the description of them according to the story of Samson, which gave us evidence of Samson. We learned that the Hazor tablet gave us archaeological evidence to support the story of Deborah, very much in detail, as a matter of fact. And finally, we learned that something called the Berneptha, and I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but that's the only way I know how to say it still, identifies Israel as a strong nation during the time immediately preceding the United Kingship period. So that's what we learned last week. Today, we're going to talk about King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. And we're going to, again, concentrate primarily on the archaeological evidence that supports their existence. So, my cartoon for the week. Nope, this one's no good. And little David throws the pebble behind his back, and thunk, there goes Goliath down. Thought that was pretty cute. Okay, so kind of review. Dissatisfied with the chaos of the period of Judges, the people began to ask for a king to unify them according to the Bible. The Bible tells us that around 1095, somewhere in that era, BC, Samuel anointed Saul as the first king, but he fails to live up to the Lord's will. Now, if you know, the Bible says Saul was, if you would have looked in the dictionary and you would have said, show me a picture of a king, it would have been Saul. He was handsome. He was a foot taller. He was charismatic. He was intelligent. He had all the attributes that one would think a king would have. But as we know, Samuel did not live up to his will. Samuel had a lot of problems. I'm sure today, if Samuel was alive in this generation, he would be laying on some psychiatrist's couch, uh, going through psychotherapy, probably on psychotropic drugs. He just had a tremendous amount of anguish. You can see in the Bible, he just constantly goes back and forth. He wants to do the right thing. He does do the right thing sometimes, but then he falls back and goes into what can only be called a fugue state. He just really is not mentally balanced at times. We know, according to the Bible, he established his capital at Gibeah, located in the northern outskirts of present day Jerusalem. Remember that, that's important, because this site was excavated by W.F. Albright. Now, we don't have a lot of evidence of Saul. And again, that doesn't surprise me at all. Uh, Remember, this was a pretty primitive area, even yet at that time. And most of the natives were living in nomadic tents. And so anything that we can find about Saul would be a blessing. Well, sure enough, we think that we have found the ruins of his royal residence at Gibeah. W.F. Albright, remember, he's the guy that basically uh, created the science of biblical archaeology, discovered what he believed to be the ruins of Saul's royal residence. The outer citadel walls were 170 by 155 feet. They were 10 feet thick. And the citadel itself was 2 stories tall with the stone staircase of the tower. Now, it was actually more of a fortress than a palace. And you got to think about something here now. When I'm talking about palaces, what our mind immediately goes to places like Buckingham Palace, uh, where the kings and queens of England live now. We're not talking about places like that. We're talking about very simple stone structures that maybe were a couple of stories, maybe 3 stories high, usually had some kind of a tower for observation, very thick walls because you wanted them for defense for purposes. So we're not talking about any really fancy palaces at all. So it was more of a fortress than a palace, and it contained what you would expect any residence to contain: grinding stones, spinning wheels, cooking pots, storage bins, wine, grain. Uh, it had just about everything you would expect. Unfortunately, that palace, those ruins, no longer exist. In the 1960s, this ruins of this palace of Saul was completely destroyed by the old King Hussein, not the present King Hussein of Jordan, who wanted to build his own palace on the site. And that's what he did. He destroyed the palace in the 1960s and built a new palace. The remains of the palace, though, definitely would seem to affirm the existence of Saul. This is a photograph of the old ruins of Gibeah, where Saul would have had his palace. And you can see again, it's overlooking the valley. They always built these things on hilltops for defensive purposes, so they could see what was coming. They were always looking out for the next invader, and so that's what it would have looked like. Now, what do we know about King David? Well, of course, we know a lot about King David from the Bible. We don't know a whole lot about him historically, because again, most of the things that King David would have built have been destroyed. Minimalists, those that don't really accept the Bible as such, historians and archaeologists that think that the Bible is more mythology than it is history, believe that if King David and King Solomon lived at all, they were nothing more than nomadic warlords with very little power. Of course, I reject that totally. I don't believe that at all. I believe the Bible is a very genuine historical document, and I believe that, obviously, as I'm trying to show, that there's ample historical and archaeological evidence to support that narrative. Since the Bible says both built palaces and Solomon built the first temple in Jerusalem, you would think that there'd be a lot of archaeological evidence. We know from the descriptions in the Bible that they had both their palaces, and the temple was extremely ornate and luxurious. They would have been magnificent structures at that period of time. But obviously, they no longer exist. You got to remember the Temple Mount, which was built on top of Mount Moriah, where Abraham reportedly, according to the Bible, was going to sacrifice Isaac, is now under Islamic control. And they have built a mosque there called the Dome of the Rock. There's also a couple other mosques there, the Alaska compound, the Dome of the Chain, and most importantly, the Dome of the Rock, which is that gold dome structure that you saw when I first started this presentation. It sits right on top of Mount Moriah, where the first temple sat. It is under Islamic control. Obviously, there's not going to be a lot of archaeological excavation of that site, particularly any that would contribute to the foundation of Israel. They are not going to allow that to happen. That's just part of what's going on in the state of Israel right now. So as a result, we have to turn elsewhere. We have to look at other places to see if we can find anything that we know about the historical King David and Solomon. And there is ample evidence of their existence and their reigns. Probably the most important archaeological evidence associated with King David is something called the Tel Dan Stela. Here's what that is. In 1993, there was an archaeologist excavating up in northern Israel, and she found a stone stele which had been used to construct an ancient stone wall. She was just excavating this structure, and she was trying to excavate the wall, and she found this rock that obviously had writing on it. She took it out. They translated the writing. And what it is an inscription on the stele, which dates from the 9th century BC, which would have been appropriate for the time that we're talking, details that an individual killed Joram, the son of Ahab, king of Israel, and the king of the house of David. The text collaborates passages from the Bible, as 2 Kings mentions that Joram is indeed the son of Ahab, 2 Kings 9, and is killed by Jehu. This is an old story. If you look in 2 Kings and read chapter 9, it tells all about the story about Joram, who was Ahab's son, and how he is killed by a man by the name of Jehu. The importance is this. By the way, the likely candidate for erecting the stele is Hazael, an Aramean king who mentioned in 2 Kings having conquered Israel. Here's the importance. The importance of the stele is that it provided the first historical evidence of King David outside the Bible. King David has not been mentioned. This is the first time that he is mentioned outside of the Bible in any historical context from that period of time. So that proves without a shadow of a doubt that David lived. We know that David was a king, and we know that he ruled, obviously, not just from the Bible now, but from this. And that's an extremely strong piece of evidence. Anytime you can find something like that really adds credence to the story of King David in the Bible. And this is the Tel Dan stele. This is a rock that she found with the writing on it. Obviously, I sure can't read that by any means at all, but it mentions the house of David on there. Now, there's another site that we need to look at also that is associated with King David, and that's called the Kirbet Kayafa site. That's another archaeological site, which is some believe is directly linked to King David, and that's located about 70 miles southwest of Jerusalem. The site sits atop a hill overlooking the valley of Elah, If you don't know what the Valley of Elah is in the Bible, that is the valley where David, uh, according to the Bible, slayed Goliath. And the structure that we're talking about here is overlooking this valley. It's on a hilltop again, and from the structure, you can see Jerusalem. You can also see the Mediterranean Sea. That gives you some idea about how small Israel is. Israel is an extremely small country. And from this hilltop, you can look both at Jerusalem and at the Mediterranean Sea. The significance again is that this is overlooking the Valley of Elah, where David apparently, according to the Bible, killed Goliath. Archaeologists working the site believe it's one of King David's palace. It's also home to a large storeroom used to collect and hold taxes in the form of grain and oil and other commodities. Again, that's how these kings supported their life. They would tax the people, and the people had to pay a tax. And they didn't pay it in money normally because they didn't have money. They paid it in goods, things like oil and grain and wine and whatever. Remember, in the Bible, when Samuel gave in to the people, he warned them that one of the things that you're going to have when you get a king is you're going to have to start paying taxes to this king. He also warned them that there was going to be the military and that their sons and daughters would have to serve in the military. And of course, both things happened exactly as he said. That's not to say that's anything wrong with that. That's just a part of having a strong centralized government. The importance of this is the fact that it does give evidence that this structure was part of a strong central government. It was strategically placed for fire and smoke signals. And again, you might immediately, your mind might go to the Old West with the Indians and their smoke signals. Folks, that's nothing new. That's not unique to the Native American. This was something that was done throughout ancient history. This was how they signaled each other from one point to the other. So, obviously they didn't have the technology that we have, like telephones and stuff like this. So what they had to do was, if they wanted to send a signal out, they would use a series of smoke signals. And just like they had certain amounts of smoke that would indicate certain things. And so it was not unusual for these fortresses, these palaces, to have a place where you would have smoke signals. Now, it's important to know that there's not been any direct link to David. We haven't found anything there with David's name on it. Again, that doesn't mean it's not David's palace or one of his palaces. Again, remember, these kings probably had multiple palaces. This would have been one of them. It wouldn't be surprising at all that David would build a palace overlooking the site of what is in a sense his introduction to Israel, where he killed the giant Goliath. Some people said it's a Philistine fortress, not David's fortress. Well, that's probably not the case because there's absolutely no evidence of pig bones. You might say, why is that important? Well, as you surely know, pigs are absolutely forbidden by the Hebrews. And if you would have evidence of pig bones there, which the Philistines used constantly, they ate pork, just like we do here in the Ozarks. And, they would, there would have been pig bones there. And there's absolutely no evidence of any pig bones, which probably indicates it was a Hebrew site. Here's the importance. Only 20% of the site's been excavated. There's a whole lot more to come. And I suspect in the years to come, if we live long enough and we pay attention, we're going to hear more about this site, because I think probably eventually there's going to be some evidence come out directly supporting this being King David's, one of his palaces. This is photographed here on the left of the actual excavation site. This is the Valley of Elah. That's the valley that supposedly David, according to the Bible, killed Goliath. This would have been this palace fortress structure, had a wall around it. had a central palace. This is a kind of a artist reconstruction of the site. Shows you what it would have looked like, and had the outline buildings, and had the smoke towers here. Would have had the palace here. This would have been what it would have looked like at the time. So, very important structure, indicating the existence of David. The other thing that we have just recently, according to archaeologists, they have just recently uncovered evidence of King David's palace in Jerusalem. Folks, this would be huge. If this actually is what we think it is, it's going to be an extremely gigantic archaeological find. It was found in 2005 by an archaeologist by the name of Eliat Mazar. She is an archaeologist, and she's very respected, and she is doing a whole lot of archaeological work around the city of Jerusalem. She, by the way, she's extremely aggressive, and she probably is doing things that don't set too well with the Islamic authorities around the temple, dome of the temple, but she's really an aggressive archaeologist. She has found what is currently called a large stone structure. They are not calling it King David's palace. They think it is. Eliat Mazar has said she thinks this is King David's palace. But right now they're calling it a large stone structure. It's only located a few hundred feet from the Temple Mount, which doesn't exactly sit well, as I said, with the authorities. And she dates the remains that she's found from around the 10th century BC, which would correspond exactly with the dates of King David. The building is perfectly situated to match the location description given in the Bible. In Nehemiah, it says, at the fountain gate that continued up the steps of the city of David, on the ascent to the wall, and passed above the site of David's palace near the water gate on the east. So, we have an accurate idea about where David's palace was in the city of Jerusalem. And, she is excavating that area, and she has found this large stone structure, which she believes, and a lot of people believe, will be the ruins of David's palace in Jerusalem. And like I said, if it is indeed the palace of David, it's going to be a gigantic archaeological find. The ruins are adjacent to what's known as the stepped stone structure, previously excavated, and whose walls are so massive, the structures of the walls supported with the city fortress. Mazar believes this was David's palace, although there are people that say no, it was only a warehouse. We will know eventually, because I can guarantee you that if this is David's palace, there will be evidence comes out to indicate that this was David's palace. This is the archaeological structure that we're talking about. It's got a roof over it, and these are some of the things that she's excavating right here. To the left over here is kind of a diagram of Jerusalem during this period of time. This is what's called down here to the south is the old city of David. This was the original Jerusalem built by David. And these are the stairs that mentioned in Nehemiah. And it says, as you walk up and you walk this way, the water gate is to the east of the palace. So that means the palace would have been about right here. And that makes absolute total sense. If you look at this is the newer part of the city. This was built by Solomon, some of it. And this is where the temple would have set. This is the place here, right here, this wall that supports the elevation of Jerusalem is what's commonly called the Wailing Wall. This is where you see pictures of the Hebrews, the Jewish people, leaving prayers in the rocks, written prayers and praying. This is a very sacred part. It's not part of the temple. A lot of people think the Wailing Wall is remnant of the temple. It's remnant of the wall that was built around to elevate around Mount Moriah and bring it up to a level fact where you could place the temple then. And this is the temple. And this is the different gates that allowed you to enter into the city, the old city of Jerusalem. And a lot of these are mentioned in the Bible. There's the sheep gate, there's the fish gate, the horse gate. Um, I don't know where they got the name the dung gate, but there it is. There's the pool of Shalom, which we'll talk about a little bit later in our presentations later in the year, because again, that's a very important archaeological excavation in itself. So this is probably the remnants, the ruins of the Palace of David. We just haven't really got to the point where they can say definitively it is, but it looks very much like it's going to be. So those are some of the things that support David. The Tel Dan Stela, where it mentions the house of David outside of the Bible, very important. The ruins at Kirbet Kayafa, which would overlook the valley of Elah, where David allegedly, according to the Bible, killed Goliath, and of course, possibility of David's palace itself. Now, what do we know about King Solomon? We know that when David died, he was, his throne was inherited by Solomon. And again, Pastor Dwayne will talk to you all about the history of this in terms of what the Bible says. We know he was one of David's children. He had many children. He was the son of Bathsheba. Remember, Bathsheba is the wife of Uriah the Hittite, which David had killed. He saw her bathing and desired her, and he had Uriah the Hittite killed in order to marry her. And that was the sin of David that prevented him from building the temple and was a stain upon David's character. Although David repented of it, and he spent the rest of his life serving God, and that's why he was so important to the Hebrew people. We know that Solomon inherited the throne from David. He's portrayed in the Bible as great in wisdom, wealth, and power. Probably mostly remembered he was the king that was allowed to build the first permanent temple to Yahweh in Jerusalem. Up to this point, worship had been in a tabernacle. Now, God has said, I will allow you to build a temple to me, a permanent temple. And the Bible goes into elaborate detail about the structure of this temple and how it was built, the size of it, what was in it. And we know all that. Of course, none of that exists anymore. The temple itself was destroyed when the Babylonians went in and took over the city of Jerusalem and destroyed it. And then later on, of course, Nehemiah, when they're restored to Jerusalem by Cyrus the Great, they build a second temple, and that in turn is destroyed by the Romans in 66 to 70 AD, when they went in and just absolutely destroyed the whole city of Jerusalem, because it was such a hotbed of dissent that they got tired of fooling around with the Jews, and they went in and just destroyed the city, including the second temple. So, what does the Bible say about Solomon? It says he undertook many building projects as outlined in 1 Kings. Here is the account of the forced labor King Solomon conscripted to build the Lord's temple, his own palace, the terraces, the wall of Jerusalem, and Hazor, Megiddo, and Gezer, as well as the store cities and towns for his chariots and for his horses. We know that Solomon was fabulously wealthy. And he had many palaces. He had gobs of horses. He had 700 concubines and 300 wives. He was, he had a very lavish lifestyle. Of course, it's surprising there's not more archaeological evidence, but again, that's because of the fact that most of what he built was destroyed in these two destructions of Jerusalem, again, by the Babylonians in 576 and the Romans in 70 AD. But That being said, there is evidence that Solomon existed. There's evidence of some of the structures outside of the city of Jerusalem and one now inside the city of Jerusalem. So let's look at this. Probably the oldest archaeological evidence supporting the story of Solomon are two sites that are mentioned in the Bible. One of them is the stables at Megiddo, and the other one is copper mines. Now, it doesn't actually mention the copper mines, but it alludes to the fact that David had very wealthy and that he had access to minerals like copper, which was very valuable, and other precious stones and gems. He would have had to have mines. Legend has it that those mines were in the Negev desert, south of Jerusalem and south of the Dead Sea. Of course, there's all sorts of books been written and movies. H. Rider Haggard wrote a book called King Solomon's Mine, which was made into a movie. And, so there's all sorts of legends about these, but there's some archaeological evidence to support them. So let's look at the mines first. There were some early excavations done where we think the copper mines were located in the Negev desert many, many years ago. But most historians pretty much doubted their authenticity. They said that probably these weren't really connected to Solomon, that they were connected to other kings and other entities, people, rulers in this area. But since that time, there's been a newer re-excavation. And with more modern techniques, they have re-excavated these areas where these mines were in operation. And they found that they did indeed operate in the 10th and 11th century BC. This would have placed it at the time that Solomon was king. So this places these mines, these legendary traditional mines that Solomon had, along with him. Also, there's been some structures that's been called stables, Solomon's stables. The most famous one is located under the Al Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount. It's been there for a long time, and it's thought to have been constructed by King Herod. Now, originally, people wanted to say no, these are Solomon's horse stables. We're kind of pretty sure now that that's not the case. Probably it was a storage area for the second temple, and when they built the Dome of the Rock on top of the Mount Moriah, they probably used this as a foundation, and later on they were excavated before the Islamic people had total control of this area. And while they were still a little bit more lenient about excavation there. So there's a lot of stories about these horse stables, as they're called, under the Temple Mount. Probably it's not, probably it is a storage area for King Herod, who was one of the kings there. Where there were some horse stables, we know for sure in the 1920s, excavations, the old city of Megiddo, out in the Jezreel Valley. If you are kind of scratching your head thinking about Megiddo and thinking about what that is the place where Armageddon is supposed to take place. It appears to be a massive area designed specifically with horses and chariots in mind. And this would go along with what's written in the Bible. Again, there's some controversy about these stables. We know they're stables. Some believe they were built by Ahab. Some attribute them to Jeroboam II. But most people attribute them to Solomon. There's evidence that suggests all three of these kings used these stables at one time or the other. Again, that's not surprising because, it's not surprising that one king would use something else that another king built. And they probably have been around for many hundreds of years. So here's some photographs. This is the what's traditionally called Solomon's stables under the Temple Dome, the Dome of the Rock. Probably that's not what they are. This was probably a storehouse built by King Herod. Up here on your upper right is the old mines that have been re-excavated down in the Negev desert. And these are being now attributed to Solomon. And this was probably the site where much of his wealth came from. These copper mines and these gold mines and other valuable articles. To the lower right down here is the excavation that's been done on the horse stables at Megiddo. They're a lot larger than it looks like in this picture. This is just a very small part of it. According to what I've been able to read, there was room here for like 1,000 horses and hundreds of chariots. So this would have been a huge horse stable that would have probably been designed to fit in all of Solomon's stables and chariot and horses. And again, he probably would have placed it somewhere like this so he could get to where he needed to get real rapidly. That's one of the main routes up and down Israel is in the Jezreel Valley. So it's probably associated with King Solomon. So there's one more thing we need to talk about. We know that Solomon built a whole lot of things in Jerusalem, and we know that most of those things are gone. The temple's gone, his palace is gone. The Bible says he built terraces. He built all sorts of things in Jerusalem, and most of them have been destroyed through these two destructive incidents in Jerusalem's past that we've talked about. 2010, Kirbet Kayafa discovered another important archaeological find while excavating what's called the Ophel Wall, which sits between the city of David and the southern wall of the Temple Mount. Remember, I showed you this diagram a little bit back later where the city of David sits to the south and that the Temple Mount and the area where the first temple was sits to the north. Well, there's a wall separating them called the Ophel Wall. And around that is another wall that she has just found evidence that exists. She found a 70-meter long, 6-meter high wall constructed during King Solomon's reign. She dated that. Mazar believes it is the one mentioned in 1 Kings chapter 3 through 1. That says Solomon made an alliance with Pharaoh and married his daughter. He brought her to the city of David until he finished building his palace and the temple of the Lord and the wall around Jerusalem. So these are some of the things that he would have built. He built his palace, he built the temple, and he built a wall around Jerusalem. She is pretty sure that she has found this gigantic wall. If indeed it turns out to be that, it's going to confirm the presence of Solomon within the city of Jerusalem, just like her excavations of the large stone structure very well may confirm the presence of David in the city of Jerusalem. Again, these are long-going incidents. She didn't find this till 2010. That's only been 11 years ago. It takes decades to excavate these things. They just don't go in with bulldozers. They go in with small paintbrushes and dentist picks. And it takes forever to excavate these sites because they don't want to make sure and not destroy anything. Because anything they find, the smallest little piece of shard of maybe a piece of pottery, which would have Solomon's name on it, would be extremely important. So that's why they take their time doing these things. She has discovered a great deal of artifacts from the first temple period, including pottery shards, large gatehouse, several ritual baths, clay jars, all these things. So this is Kirbet Kayafa, and she is standing beside what she thinks is the Wall of Solomon that's mentioned in the Bible. Now, here's a photograph, and you can see that this is the old city of David here. These would have been the steps, and this would have been going through the old city of David. Up here is where David's palace would have been, in this area through here. Then this is what she thinks is the Wall of Solomon. This would have surrounded his palace. This is the Temple Mount. This is where the temple that he built would have set. And this is the elevated wall that he built to raise all this area up so it would be level. So people would come. And if you know anything about the temple, there was different areas where different groups of people could pray. And this is where the temple would have set, in this area right through here. And this would have been the elevated area. This is the Wailing Wall. This is what we talk about when we hear about Jews going, we see pictures of them at the Wailing Wall. This is the Wailing Wall right here in this area. So this is some of the archaeological evidence supporting the existence of King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. Next week, we're going to talk about the divided kingdom. As we know, if you read your Bible, the kingship only lasted 3 generations, only lasted 3 different people, and then it split. One of the reasons it split was because of the sins of Solomon. He began, according to the Bible, he had so many wives, he began to practice their religions. He got away from the religion of God. And the result was that God predicted, he prophesied that indeed the kingship would be split and would be torn asunder. And that's exactly what happened with the next generation. One of his sons, Rehoboam, inherited the kingship, but it ended up being split with another line in David's line, Jeroboam. And so you see a split between the southern kingdom, known as Judah, and the northern kingdom, known as Israel. That's what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to talk about the divided kingdom and the archaeological evidence that supports some of the events in the divided kingdom. And then we'll talk about the period of time known as the Restoration, the Second Temple period, where the Hebrews were allowed to come back and they rebuilt the temple again, much smaller and much less luxurious than it was the first time. And of course, that temple was ultimately destroyed by the Romans, as I've said, in between 66 and 70 AD. So that's it for the day. I appreciate you being with me. I hope you learned something. And next week, we will look at the divided kingdom. So with that, I'm going to check out and we will see you next week.